Anne was in high spirits as she left the supermarket, bags full of groceries in hand, eagerly preparing for a festive dinner to celebrate her 40th birthday. The evening promised to be filled with laughter and warmth, surrounded by close friends. But in a sudden twist, Anne's life takes a turn when an unexpected encounter with a stranger at the parking lot sets off a chain of events that leads her to question everything she thought she knew about her life. As the celebration unfolds, Anne is confronted with the harsh realities of her marriage, leaving her heartbroken and alone on a night meant for joy. Yet, in the depths of despair, a new chapter begins to take shape. Anne's journey from pain to healing is filled with surprising connections, professional triumphs, and the rediscovery of love in the most unexpected places. By the end of her story, Anne finds herself not only rebuilding her life but also discovering happiness she never thought possible. If you are not subscribed, I recommend you subscribe and activate the bell so you don't miss any videos. Anne hurried out of the supermarket, her arms weighed down by bags overflowing with carefully chosen groceries. Each item had been selected with care, reflecting the anticipation bubbling inside her. Tonight was special, her 40th birthday, and she had planned an intimate dinner with just her closest friends and their families. It wasn't just any dinner, it was a celebration of life, of the friendships that had stood the test of time, and of the quiet, unspoken hopes she still held for the future. As she navigated her way through the busy parking lot, her mind was a whirlwind of thoughts. She imagined the warmth of the evening, the clinking of glasses, the laughter of friends filling her home. A smile tugged at her lips as she mentally planned each course, visualizing the dishes she would soon prepare. The aroma of roasted vegetables and slow-cooked meats would fill the air, mingling with the scent of freshly baked bread. But amidst these happy thoughts, she was also lost in a haze of reflection. 40 years. It seemed both a lifetime and a blink of an eye. Where had the years gone? What had she achieved? The questions echoed in her mind, mingling with memories both sweet and bitter. In her distraction, Anne didn't notice as she stepped off the curb and into the parking lot, her steps faltering for just a moment. But that brief lapse was all it took. Out of nowhere, a sudden and forceful impact hit her from behind, sending her sprawling forward. Her bags flew from her grasp, the contents spilling out across the rough, cold asphalt. Time seemed to slow as she felt herself falling, the ground rushing up to meet her with a hard, unforgiving embrace. A sharp pain shot through her hand as it scraped against the pavement, and a cry of surprise and pain burst from her lips, raw and involuntary. "Mom, oh my God, I'm so sorry. I didn't see you there. Where did you even come from?" The panicked voice of a man rang out, laced with terror and disbelief. He stumbled out of his car, his face pale as he rushed to her side, his hands shaking as he reached out to help her up. His eyes were wide with fear, as if he couldn't quite believe what had just happened. Anne struggled to her feet, her heart pounding in her chest, still reeling from the shock. Her body trembled, adrenaline coursing through her veins as she tried to process the accident. Anger flared up within her, sharp and hot. "You nearly ran me over. How can someone so reckless even be allowed to drive?" she snapped, her voice tight with pain and fury as she cradled her injured hand, the sting of the fall still fresh. The man's face flushed with a mix of shame and regret. He stammered, his voice thick with remorse. I didn't see you, I swear. You're right, I should have been more careful. I was distracted, and I'm so sorry. Please, let me make it up to you. I'll drive you home, and I'll pick up your groceries. It's the least I can do." As he knelt, hurriedly gathering the scattered items, Anne's anger began to ebb, replaced by a creeping sense of guilt. She knew she had been lost in her thoughts, her mind elsewhere, and she hadn't been paying attention to her surroundings. Her breath came in shallow, ragged gasps as she tried to steady herself. Softening her tone, she sighed deeply, the fight draining out of her. "I suppose I wasn't paying much attention either. I was lost in thought. I guess we both share some of the blame. I'd appreciate the ride home. My name's Anne, by the way. The man looked up at her, his expression softening as he offered a small, tentative smile. I'm Matthew. It's nice to meet you, even if it's under these ... unfortunate circumstances. As they drove, the initial tension between them gradually eased, giving way to a more comfortable silence, punctuated by the low hum of the car's engine. The city lights blurred past the windows as Matthew navigated the streets, and for a moment, Anne allowed herself to relax, the events of the day slowly fading into the background. Trying to fill the silence, Matthew eventually spoke, his voice laced with a quiet warmth. You know, your husband is a very lucky man to have such a beautiful, smart wife by his side. Unfortunately, my luck hasn't been as good. My wife left me a few years ago, and now it's just me and my little girl trying to get by. It's tough, but we manage. Do you have any children? At his words, a shadow passed over Anne's face, a painful reminder of dreams unfulfilled. The mention of children touched a raw nerve, one that she had carefully hidden away. Despite years of trying, she and her husband had never been blessed with a child, a sorrow that weighed heavily on her heart. It was a deep, aching void that she rarely spoke of, especially not to strangers. Her voice tightened as she replied, "No, we don't have children." Sensing the shift in her mood, Matthew glanced at her, his expression unreadable. He could tell he had touched on something sensitive, but he didn't press further. The rest of the drive was filled with a heavy silence, both of them lost in their thoughts. As they finally pulled up to Anne's home, a grand, elegant house standing behind tall, wrought iron gates, she turned to Matthew with a polite, if somewhat strained, smile. "Thank you for the ride. I appreciate it. Take care." Matthew returned her smile, albeit with a hint of lingering concern. "Anytime, Anne. Take care of yourself," he said softly as she stepped out of the car. Anne watched as he drove away, the tail lights of his car fading into the distance. She stood there for a moment, the cool night air brushing against her skin, her thoughts still swirling. The day had taken an unexpected turn, and she felt a strange mix of emotions: relief that she was okay, guilt for her initial anger, and a lingering sadness that she couldn't quite shake. As she finally turned and walked up the path to her home, the lights inside glowing warmly, she couldn't help but reflect on the encounter. It was a reminder of how quickly life could change, and how fragile and unpredictable it could be. But it was also a reminder of the kindness of strangers, of the unexpected connections that could be forged in the most unlikely of circumstances. As she crossed the threshold of her home, she resolved to let go of the day's frustrations and focus on the celebration ahead. After all, tonight was about joy, about cherishing the people who mattered most, and about embracing the future with hope and an open heart. Matthew noticed the subtle shift in Anne's demeanor and quickly apologized, his voice gentle but laced with concern. "Anne, I'm sorry if I said something that upset you. I didn't mean to offend you." Anne shook her head, offering a small, weary smile. "No, it's not your fault. Forgive me. My nerves have been a bit frayed lately. Thank you again for everything with that." She quickly turned her attention to unpacking the groceries, trying to shake off the lingering tension from their encounter. She moved through the kitchen with practiced ease, preparing the dinner she had envisioned. The smell of spices filled the air as she chopped, stirred, and seasoned, but her mind was elsewhere. The table in the living room was already set, each place meticulously arranged for her guests. Yet as the minutes ticked away and the time for the guests' arrival drew near, Anne felt a familiar knot of anxiety tightening in her chest. She reached for her phone and dialed her husband's number, hoping to hear his reassuring voice, but the call went unanswered. A heavy sigh escaped her lips as she stared at the phone, disappointment settling in like a dark cloud. Lately, Christopher had been working late into the night, always engrossed in some critical project that seemed to demand more of his time than ever before. Anne had grown accustomed to his absences, learning to live with the quiet loneliness that had slowly crept into their marriage. She had stopped asking too many questions, knowing they would only lead to his irritation and curt responses. Just as she was lost in her thoughts, the doorbell rang, pulling her back to the present. She hurried to the intercom, and a smile spread across her face as she saw Gwen and Wes beaming up at the camera. They had been friends with Anne and Christopher since their college days, and over the years they had remained the closest people in Anne's life. Christopher had always been selective about who he let into their world, and apart from a few friends from their youth, they rarely opened their homes to others. Anne opened the door, greeting them with a warm embrace. "Anne, you look stunning as always. It's like you never aged, still as radiant as you were at 25, Gwen exclaimed, her voice full of admiration. "Happy birthday, dear. This is for you." Wes handed Anne a beautiful bouquet, the vibrant colors brightening the room. Anne accepted the flowers with a grateful smile, though her heart was heavy with the absence of her husband. "Thank you so much. Please come in." "And where's our hard-working Christopher? Is he not home yet?" we asked, glancing around as if expecting to see him walk in at any moment. Anne forced a smile, trying to keep her tone light. "You know how it is, always urgent projects, meetings, and business. Christopher never seems to get a break." Gwen's expression softened, but there was a hint of concern in her eyes. "I don't know how you manage, Anne. It seems like you're always alone. Have you ever thought about going back to work? Wes is looking for a new specialist, and as you know, finding a good architect is as hard as finding a good surgeon. You were the best in our course. I'm sure you'd be amazing." Anne's smile faltered for a moment before she regained her composure. "I'd love to, but Christopher is against it. He thinks I should focus on things at home." Gwen's brow furrowed, and she hesitated before speaking, her voice firm but kind. "Anne, forgive me for being blunt, but I think you're being unfair to yourself. Christopher is being selfish, and you're letting him. Don't you see? He's turned you into a housekeeper while he does as he pleases. It's convenient for him, but what about you?" Anne felt the sting of Gwen's words, but before the conversation could get any more uncomfortable, she forced a bright smile and gestured towards the table. "Let's not dwell on that now. I'm so glad you're here. Please, let's sit down and enjoy the evening. I'm sure Christopher will join us soon." The tension in the room eased as they moved to the dining table, the conversation shifting to lighter topics as they began to eat. Laughter filled the room as they reminisced about their college days, sharing stories of youthful misadventures and forgotten dreams. For a moment, the weight on Anne's heart lifted as she lost herself in the warmth of her friend's company. But just as the evening seemed to be hitting its stride, the front door opened, and Christopher finally walked in. His expression was serious, his smile more an obligatory gesture than a genuine one as he greeted the guests. He looked tired, worn down by the demands of his work, and the spark that once lit up his eyes seemed dimmed. "Christopher, it's so good to see you," Gwen exclaimed, though her tone held a note of reproach. "You could have come earlier today. We haven't seen each other in so long, and it's your wife's birthday. And where are the flowers for the hostess and the woman you love?" Christopher's jaw tightened, and he offered a strained smile. "I'm glad to see you all too, but work doesn't wait, as you know. Wes probably understands what I'm dealing with." Wes nodded sympathetically, but Gwen wasn't about to let it go. "Work is important, Christopher, but so is your family. You should be here for Anne, especially today." The room fell silent, the tension thick enough to cut with a knife. Anne could feel the air grow heavy with unspoken words and emotions she wasn't sure how to navigate. She had hoped tonight would be a celebration, a brief escape from the growing distance between her and Christopher, but it seemed even this small hope was slipping through her fingers. "Please, let's just enjoy the evening," Anne said softly, trying to smooth over the awkwardness as she led the way to the table. But as they all took their seats, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing, something vital that no amount of laughter or small talk could replace. And as the night wore on, Anne found herself watching Christopher, searching for any sign of the man she had fallen in love with so many years ago. But the more she looked, the more she feared that the man she had once known was slipping further and further away, lost to the demands of a life that no longer seemed to include her. "I didn't have time to buy flowers. I was rushing, as you can see." "Anne, happy birthday," Christopher muttered, his tone flat as he handed her a small box. "Thank you, dear," Anne replied, forcing a smile as she opened the box. Inside, she found yet another piece of jewelry, just like every year. She tried to hide the sadness in her eyes, knowing that Christopher had never truly put thought into her gifts. Jewelry was his default, an easy solution that required no real consideration or effort. As much as she appreciated the gesture, it was just another reminder of how distant they had become. With Christopher's arrival, the atmosphere at the table brightened slightly, but it was a fleeting joy. His phone buzzed incessantly with messages, each one pulling him further away from the conversation. Anne watched as he glanced down at the screen, his brow furrowing in concentration. The guests noticed too, but no one said anything, though the unspoken tension hung heavy in the air. By the end of the evening, after bidding goodbye to Gwen and Wes, the house fell into an oppressive silence. Anne began to clean up, moving mechanically through the tasks, while Christopher remained glued to his phone, barely acknowledging her presence. When she finished, she couldn't hold back any longer. She turned to her husband, her voice trembling with the weight of her emotions. "Christopher, don't you think that even when you're at home, you're very far from it in your thoughts?" she asked, her words carefully measured. "Don't nitpick. I'm working okay," he replied curtly, not even bothering to look up. "I understand," Anne said quietly, swallowing the lump in her throat. She walked to the bedroom, her heart heavy, tears threatening to spill over. Once she closed the door behind her, she finally allowed herself to cry, the sobs racking her body as she sank onto the bed. Despite being married, Anne felt lonelier than she ever had before. The emptiness was suffocating, a void that her husband no longer seemed to notice or care about. She thought back to her conversation with Gwen and Wes. Their words had lingered with her, echoing in her mind. Maybe Gwen was right, maybe it was time to take control of her life again, to do something for herself instead of waiting for Christopher to change. The idea of returning to work began to take root in her mind, offering a small glimmer of hope in the darkness. The next morning, Anne awoke early, but the bed beside her was cold and empty. A sense of dread washed over her as she noticed the door to Christopher's study was slightly ajar. Peeking inside, she saw him sprawled on the couch, using his jacket as a makeshift blanket. Her heart pounded in her chest. Something was undeniably wrong, and she couldn't shake the feeling that their marriage was unraveling right before her eyes. After a quick shower, Anne went downstairs, finding Christopher already in the living room. He was sitting in a chair, staring out the window with a cup of coffee in hand. The distant look in his eyes sent a chill down her spine. He seemed so far away, so unreachable. When she greeted him, he started, clearly surprised by her presence. "You've been acting strange lately. Are you okay? You slept in the office. Are you avoiding me? Christopher, do you have problems at work? What's going on?" Anne's voice was filled with a mix of worry and frustration, the questions spilling out all at once. Christopher didn't answer right away. Instead, he took a slow sip of his coffee, his gaze never leaving the view outside. When he finally spoke, his voice was unnervingly calm. "We need to talk." Anne's heart sank at his words, but she pressed on. "Yes, I wanted to talk to you as well. I know you'll be against it, but I've decided to start working. Before she could finish, Christopher cut her off, his tone cold and detached. "I've fallen in love with another woman. She's pregnant, and we're expecting a child." The world seemed to tilt on its axis, and Anne's vision blurred. Her legs felt weak, and she swayed, struggling to stay upright. "But how long has this been going on?" she managed to choke out, her voice barely above a whisper. "What does it matter?" Christopher replied with a shrug. "I found out about the pregnancy yesterday, if that's what you want to know." Anne's breath hitched as tears welled up in her eyes, spilling over despite her best efforts to hold them back. "Thank you for not ruining my birthday," she whispered, her voice breaking as she spoke. Christopher sighed, irritation creeping into his voice. "Listen, let's do without the hysterics, okay?" Anne didn't respond. She couldn't. The pain was too raw, too overwhelming. She turned away from him, feeling the weight of her shattered dreams pressing down on her chest. The man she had loved, the life they had built together, it was all crumbling before her eyes, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. She walked back to the bedroom, each step heavier than the last, and closed the door behind her, letting the tears flow freely. The loneliness she had felt before was nothing compared to the desolation that engulfed her now. "Christopher, don't you care about my feelings at all?" Anne's voice trembled as she confronted him, the weight of his indifference pressing down on her heart. Christopher's expression hardened, his voice rising with frustration. "And what about my feelings, Anne? I'm 40 years old, and everyone I know already has children. And what do we have? Nothing." Anne flinched at the harshness in his tone, but before she could respond, Christopher continued, his voice laced with bitterness. "How dare you blame me for not having children? You have no idea what I've been through, how many doctors I've visited, how many disappointments I've faced. Stop this spectacle of yours. Why all this drama? Thousands of people get divorced and move on. Understand? I will soon have a son, and I will finally be happy." He paused, the finality of his words hanging in the air like a heavy curtain. "Tonight, when I come back, we will discuss the details of the divorce." With that, he turned on his heel and stormed out, slamming the door behind him. The sound of the door echoed through the empty house, and Anne collapsed onto the floor, her sobs racking her body. The pain and humiliation were unbearable. She had always believed that, despite everything, they could somehow make it work. But now, that hope was shattered, leaving her with nothing but a hollow ache where her love for Christopher once resided. Meanwhile, Christopher felt a surge of relief as he drove away from the house. The weight of his confession lifted from his shoulders. The first thing he planned to do was visit Ellen and tell her that he had finally come clean to Anne, that their divorce was imminent, and that they could finally be together openly. He imagined their future living together, raising their child, building a life that made him happy in ways his marriage had failed to do. He used his key to unlock the door to the apartment he rented for Ellen, but was surprised to find her packing a large suitcase, her movements hurried and determined. "I'm home," he called out with a smile, trying to lighten the mood. "Why isn't anyone greeting me? And what's going on here? Are we going somewhere?" Ellen looked up, surprised to see him so soon. "Oh, hi, darling. I didn't expect you this early," she said, her tone casual, but there was a tension in her posture that Christopher didn't miss. He approached her, twirling her playfully in his arms. "So, you didn't answer me. Are we going somewhere?" he asked, his voice light and teasing. Ellen pouted theatrically, trying to soften the blow of her words. "Yes, we're going to live in the suburbs. I found a big house with a large garden. It will be a cozy place for us and our future baby," she said, though her voice lacked its usual warmth. Christopher's face lit up with excitement. "Wow, that sounds wonderful. When are we leaving?" Ellen took a deep breath, her expression turning serious. "Christopher, there's something I need to tell you. We're not going anywhere. I wanted to wait for you to tell me this in person. I thought we could build a life together and raise our child together. But my plans have changed. I'm not going to live with you." Christopher froze, his mind reeling. What? What do you mean? I thought we were in this together." Ellen shook her head, her gaze steady and unwavering. "I've made my decision, Christopher. After you told your wife everything, I realized I couldn't be with you. I don't want a life with someone who treats their family the way you do, who's always gone on business trips, who's rude and distant, who doesn't even seem interested in the life he already has." "But why? I thought we were happy," Christopher stammered, trying to make sense of her words. "The problem is, you think and believe in something that doesn't exist," Ellen replied calmly. "You need to figure out what you want, Christopher. Do you want to be a father? Do you want to be with me? Or are you just running away from something? If you can't answer those questions, then we should end this now. Goodbye." Without another word, Ellen picked up her suitcase and walked out the door, leaving Christopher standing there, stunned and alone. He sank into a chair, his thoughts a chaotic mess. Everything he had wanted, everything he had imagined for his future, was slipping through his fingers. He had thought he was pursuing happiness, but now he was left with nothing but regret and emptiness. Hours later, when he returned home, the house was eerily quiet. He walked in to find Anne packing the last of her belongings into bags. The sight of her, so determined and resolute, sent a pang of guilt through him. "Anne, I need to explain myself. "No, Christopher," she interrupted, her voice calm but firm. "You don't need to explain anything. I understand everything perfectly. Let's make the divorce as quick as possible. I'll be staying with friends for now. We can discuss the details later." Christopher opened his mouth to protest, but the words died in his throat. He watched as Anne picked up her bags and walked past him, the finality of the situation sinking in. He had wanted freedom, but now that he had it, it felt like a prison. As the door closed behind her, Christopher realized that he had lost everything that truly mattered, and it was all his own doing. Anne's friends welcomed her with open arms, wrapping her in the warmth and support she so desperately needed. They listened as she poured out her heart, comforting her with kind words and shared tears. As the days passed, Anne slowly began to adapt to her new life, finding solace in working on a creative project with her friends. The process was healing, giving her a sense of purpose and a distraction from her grief. Despite the lingering sadness in her heart, Anne felt a sense of relief when the divorce was finalized. With that chapter of her life closed, she turned her focus inward, determined to rebuild her life with intention, prioritizing her happiness and the things that truly mattered to her. One chilly evening, Anne found herself shivering as she waited outside, cursing herself for not having called a taxi in advance. The cold air bit at her skin, and she scolded herself aloud, "Oh, my bad. I should have caught a taxi in advance." As she looked around, she noticed the headlights of a car parked on the other side of the street. The road was eerily empty, and in a moment of impatience, she decided to take a shortcut across the 4 lanes of the roadway. But as soon as she stepped onto the road, a car suddenly came speeding around the corner, its headlights blinding her. The screech of brakes filled the air, and Anne stumbled in fright, her heart pounding in her chest. "Are you crazy? Do you have a death wish?" came the sharp voice of a man as he hurriedly exited the car. "Is it you who's crazy? Watch where you're driving," Anne snapped back, even though she knew she was the one at fault. The man's voice softened with a hint of recognition. "Oh, an old acquaintance. Hello. It seems the same people are always on the road," he said, his tone mocking. The headlights still blinded her, preventing her from seeing his face clearly, but there was something familiar about his voice. "Let me give you a hand. I'll help you up," he offered, reaching out to her. "Thanks, but I've already been helped," Anne retorted, her voice laced with irritation as she gingerly touched her bruised knees and hands. "Tomorrow is an important day for me. I have to present a project to a client, and now you've ruined everything. What will the client think of me?" The man raised an eyebrow, amused by her indignation. "And you should tell this person the truth, that you're a frivolous person who often throws herself under the wheels of a car." "You're a bore," Anne shot back, though her tone had softened, a slight smile tugging at her lips. "You're right. That's exactly the type of person I am," the man replied with a chuckle. "Either way, get in the car. I'll take you home, or leave the road. I'm in a hurry." Okay, Anne relented. "I don't want to go in this state. Take me home. It's your responsibility because you practically hit me with your car." She quickly got up from the wet asphalt and plopped down on the passenger seat, finally getting a good look at the driver as he turned toward her. Her eyes widened in surprise. "You, Matthew. If I remember your name correctly." "Yes, that's me," he confirmed, a smile spreading across his face. "I recognized you right away. You're Anne." They both laughed, the tension from the near accident dissipating as they shared a moment of unexpected familiarity. "What a coincidence that you almost ended up under the wheels of the same car as a few months ago," Matthew remarked with a grin. "Well, I remember where to take you." Anne's smile faltered slightly as she shook her head. "A lot has changed in my life. I have a different address now. You know the new apartment buildings not far from the South Bridge?" "Yes, I know them." "So it turns out we're neighbors now," Matthew said, his curiosity piqued. He glanced at her, his tone turning more serious. "Excuse my curiosity, but why did you move from a house to an apartment?" "My daughter and I are dreaming of moving into a house. The air is cleaner and everything is different." Anne hesitated for a moment before answering, her voice tinged with a mix of resignation and sadness. "I divorced my husband. He bought me this apartment, so I moved." Matthew's expression softened with sympathy. "I'm sorry to hear that. As far as I remember, you had a happy family not too long ago." "It's all gone now," Anne replied quietly. "I couldn't have children with my husband, but his mistress got pregnant. Now they live in my house, enjoying their life, and I'm in the apartment. That's it. I've satisfied your curiosity. Let's be quiet now. I have an important day at work tomorrow." Matthew fell silent, realizing the depth of her pain. "I'm sorry, Anne. I didn't realize it was like this," he said softly. The rest of the drive passed in silence, the weight of Anne's revelation hanging heavily between them. When they finally arrived at her apartment building, Matthew smiled gently as he parked the car. "It looks like we're neighbors now. I live just across the street. I hope this isn't the last time we meet." Anne managed a small smile in return. "Only let us meet under different circumstances. Thank you for the ride, Matthew." With that, she stepped out of the car and walked into her new home, the memory of their conversation lingering in her mind. As she prepared for the important day ahead, she couldn't help but feel a glimmer of hope. Despite everything she had been through, maybe, just maybe, this unexpected reunion with Matthew was a sign that new beginnings were possible, even after the darkest of times. Anne tossed and turned in bed all night, her mind racing between thoughts of the project she had worked so hard on and the unexpected encounter with Matthew. Despite everything, she found herself drawn to him. His easygoing nature and the way he looked at her with genuine interest had left a lasting impression. As she finally drifted off to sleep in the early hours of the morning, she hoped that their paths would cross again, but this time under better circumstances. The morning sun filtered through the curtains, casting a warm glow over the room, but Anne barely noticed as she groggily opened her eyes. Her heart skipped a beat when she glanced at the clock. "I overslept. Oh, not today of all days." She gasped, springing out of bed. The panic set in as she dashed around her apartment, trying to get ready as quickly as possible. Within 10 minutes, she was fully dressed, had managed to touch up her lashes, apply a bit of blush to bring some color to her cheeks, and had tied her long hair into a tight, no-nonsense bun. As she hurried to the door, she cursed herself again for not calling a taxi in advance. Now, she would have to waste precious time waiting for a car to arrive, time she simply didn't have. Just as she was about to pull out her phone to request a ride, a familiar voice called out behind her. "Good morning," neighbor Matthew greeted her, a smile playing on his lips. Anne turned around and breathed a sigh of relief. "Matthew, thank goodness. I'm late for a critical meeting. Can you help me out?" Without hesitation, she ran toward his car, where her newfound acquaintance was standing by the door. "I was up late last night working on a project," she explained hurriedly as she approached. "It's critical for my future and the company's reputation. My boss says the client is very picky, and I'm the only one who knows all the nuances of the project's execution. If anyone can convince the customer that our project is the best fit, it's me." Matthew chuckled, his eyes shining with admiration as he took in her flustered yet determined demeanor. "Well, how can I refuse a beautiful woman in distress? By the way, I'm also on my way to an important meeting, not far from where you almost got hit yesterday." He noted, his tone teasing as he opened the car door for her. Anne smiled gratefully, a bit of the tension easing from her shoulders. "Thank you, Matthew. I appreciate it. But I have to agree to one condition: lunch together sometime." Matthew raised an eyebrow, clearly pleased by her suggestion. "I'll take you up on that offer. Let's get you to your meeting first." As they sped toward her office, Anne's heart raced, not just from the fear of being late, but from the flutter of excitement at the prospect of spending more time with Matthew. When they finally pulled up to her office building, she jumped out of the car, barely giving him time to stop fully. "Thanks again, Matthew," she called out as she hurried toward the entrance. Matthew watched her go, a smile tugging at his lips. There was something about Anne that intrigued him, something that made him want to get to know her better. He shook his head, amused by the thought, before parking the car and heading toward the same office building. Meanwhile, Anne, still catching her breath, practically flew into the office. She made a beeline for her boss's desk, her hands already reaching for the project materials she had prepared. "Wes, have you looked at the project? I did everything I could and even more. There are some issues, especially with the construction site by the river, but I figured out a solution to the flooding problem," she said, her voice a mix of urgency and confidence as she grabbed a pencil and started sketching out her ideas on a large sheet of paper spread across the desk. Wes, who had been reviewing her work, looked up, impressed by her dedication and the clarity of her ideas. "Anne, you've outdone yourself. This is exactly what we needed. I knew I could count on you to get it right." Relief washed over Anne as she saw the approval in his eyes. Despite the chaotic start to her morning, it seemed like everything was falling into place. But as she stood there, explaining her approach, her mind briefly drifted back to Matthew. The way he had stepped in to help her without hesitation, the easy banter between them, it all felt so natural. She couldn't help but wonder what the future held for them, now that their paths had crossed once more. For now, though, she pushed those thoughts aside, focusing on the task at hand. Today was important, not just for her career, but for the new life she was building, one where she was in control, where her happiness and fulfillment came first. And maybe, just maybe, Matthew would be a part of that new beginning. For a few precious moments, Wes found himself utterly captivated, his heart swelling with admiration for the woman standing before him. "Anne, you are nothing short of a miracle," he began, his voice trembling with a mix of gratitude and awe. "In just one evening, you managed to achieve what my most seasoned specialists couldn't even dream of. My dear Anne, the client will be arriving any minute now, and all my hopes are pinned on you. Will you be the one to present your project?" Anne met his gaze with unwavering confidence, her eyes shimmering with determination. "Of course, Wes, you can count on me. Don't worry, I'll handle everything with the highest level of professionalism," she reassured him, her voice calm yet filled with a quiet intensity. But before they could proceed, a familiar voice broke through the tension in the room, causing Anne to turn on her heel in surprise. Her heart skipped a beat as she recognized the man standing in the doorway, and she found herself nearly losing her balance. "Matthew, what on earth are you doing here?" she exclaimed, her voice a blend of shock and disbelief, barely masking the emotional turmoil that had begun to stir within her. Matthew's face lit up with a warm, reassuring smile. "What a delightful surprise, Anne. It seems that I'm the very client who kept you burning the midnight oil," he said with a teasing lilt in his voice. At that moment, Wes, who had been anxiously assessing the situation, felt his tension begin to dissolve. The atmosphere had shifted from one of apprehension to one of Essie into one of camaraderie and familiarity, a change that did not go unnoticed. "Good afternoon, Mr. Foy," Wes interjected, extending his hand in greeting, his voice now laced with a newfound ease. "And I see that you're already acquainted with Anne," Wes continued, a knowing smile playing on his lips as he observed the dynamic between the two. "Good afternoon indeed. Yes, Anne and I have known each other for quite some time. We're neighbors and friends, and I'm certain that whatever she has prepared will be nothing short of impressive," Matthew responded, his tone filled with genuine warmth and affection. "Well then, shall we move on to the presentation?" Wes suggested, eager to capitalize on the positive energy that now filled the room. As the presentation commenced, the atmosphere remained pleasant and engaging. Matthew's eyes were locked on Anne as she skillfully navigated through the details of the project, each word she spoke only deepening his admiration for her talent and dedication. To be completely honest, I initially approached another firm with a similar request, but their proposal was nothing short of a disaster. They couldn't even begin to address the issue of potential seasonal flooding, but you've managed to solve it brilliantly," Matthew confessed, his voice tinged with genuine amazement. Anne, ever humble, blushed slightly as she responded, "It wasn't just me, Matthew. Our entire team put in countless hours to bring this project to life." Her modesty only served to enhance her charm, and Matthew found himself even more drawn to her. "I'm thoroughly impressed," Anne Matthews said, his voice softening as he spoke her name. "I would love to invite you to the site where the house will be built. There are a few more details I'd like to go over with you in person. Would tomorrow work for you?" he asked, his eyes searching hers for a sign of agreement. Anne, now blushing even more, stole a glance at Wes, seeking his approval. Wes, who had been silently observing the exchange, could hardly contain his pride. "Well, Anne, you've made an excellent impression on the client. Congratulations, you'll be leading this project to its completion," he declared with a broad smile, his voice filled with sincere joy for her. Throughout the rest of the day, Anne was practically floating on air. Everything in her life seemed to be finally falling into place. The memories of her ex-husband, who had betrayed her so deeply, felt distant and inconsequential now. There was something undeniably special in the way Matthew looked at her, a connection that did not go unnoticed by Wes, who had known Anne for years. And Matthew, too, made no secret of his growing admiration for her, his eyes often lingering on her with a look that spoke volumes. Wes, sensing the blossoming relationship, entrusted Anne with the project, understanding just how much this opportunity meant to her and genuinely wishing her all the happiness in the world. As the workday drew to a close, Anne left the office with a sense of lightness she hadn't felt in years. She paused outside, glancing around as if expecting to see Matthew nearby, the thought bringing a smile to her lips. "What are you doing, Anne? Are you suddenly 20 years old again?" she mused aloud, shaking her head at herself. With a playful yet self-conscious chuckle, she made her way to the crosswalk, determined to keep her feet firmly on the ground, even if her heart was beginning to soar. The following morning, Anne was ready and waiting at the agreed-upon meeting spot, her usual patience tested by Matthew's uncharacteristic lateness. She had always valued punctuality, seeing it as a sign of respect and commitment, and as each minute ticked by, her irritation grew. When she finally spotted Matthew approaching from a distance, her frustration was palpable. "Matthew, I've been standing here in the rain for half an hour waiting for you," she said, her voice laced with a mix of annoyance and concern, her usually calm demeanor cracking under the weight of her disappointment. Matthew, his face etched with genuine regret, hurried to apologize. "Anne, I am so sorry. Please forgive me," he began, his voice filled with sincerity. "My daughter fell ill last night, and her fever spiked unexpectedly. I didn't have your number to inform you, so I couldn't reach out. Unfortunately, we'll have to postpone our trip today," he explained, his eyes pleading for understanding. The concern in his voice softened Anne's frustration, replacing it with a mix of empathy and curiosity. "I see. I hope she's all right now," Anne responded, her tone gentle, yet tinged with the lingering disappointment of the disrupted plans. Matthew nodded, a small, grateful smile touching his lips. "She's stable now, but I couldn't leave her without making sure she was all right. Again, I'm truly sorry for the inconvenience," he said, his voice earnest. Anne's irritation began to fade, replaced by a deeper understanding of the situation. "Of course, Matthew. Family comes first. Let's reschedule when things settle down," she said, her voice warm and forgiving, her heart still fluttering from the unexpected twists of the morning. As they parted ways, both couldn't shake the sense that something more was growing between them, something that neither had anticipated but both were beginning to welcome with cautious hope. "Oh, Matthew, I'm so sorry," Anne said, her voice tinged with guilt and concern. "Is there anything I can do to help?" Matthew looked at her, his eyes softening with gratitude. "I could use your help," he admitted, the weight of his worry evident in his voice. "I don't want to leave EVA alone, not even for a moment. I need to run to the pharmacy, but I can't bear the thought of her being by herself. How about this, you head home and I'll go to the pharmacy. But first, take down my number. If you need anything at all, don't hesitate to call me. You can call me anytime, Anne. I'll always be here to help. Now, just give me your apartment number, and I'll make a quick run to the pharmacy and bring everything over." Anne smiled, touched by his kindness. "You're helping me out, Matthew. I don't know what I'd do without you." 15 minutes later, Anne returned from the supermarket, her arms full of bags containing fresh fruits and the medicine Matthew had asked for. She felt a sense of purpose as she made her way back, eager to be of assistance. When she reached Matthew's apartment, he greeted her at the door with a warm, tender smile. "Come in, please. Eva's finally asleep. I made some tea for us, and you're all soaked from the rain. I wouldn't want you to catch a cold because of me," he said softly, his concern evident. Matthew gently helped her out of her coat, his touch lingering for a moment longer than necessary, and invited her into the cozy warmth of his apartment. Anne was pleasantly surprised by the comfort and inviting atmosphere that filled the space. It was a reflection of Matthew himself, kind, caring, and full of warmth. "Matthew, I'm sorry about earlier," Anne said, her voice filled with sincerity. "I shouldn't have insisted on you coming out in this weather. You should be resting, not running around in the rain." Matthew smiled, his eyes filled with understanding. "Everything will be fine, Anne. I'll be more careful next time, but thank you for your patience and for being here. I appreciate it," he said, his voice sincere and full of gratitude. As Anne was preparing to leave, Matthew hesitated for a moment before stepping closer to her. "Anne, are you free this Friday evening? I'd like to take you to dinner," he asked, his voice carrying a hopeful tone as if this question had been on his mind for some time. Anne felt her heart flutter at the invitation, a warm smile spreading across her face. "Well, I suppose I am," she replied, trying to sound casual even as excitement bubbled up inside her. "I'll be waiting for your call." The days leading up to Friday were filled with a mix of anticipation and nervous excitement. Anne couldn't help but wonder what the evening would bring. When the night finally arrived, she found herself anxiously waiting to see Matthew. As she entered the restaurant, her eyes immediately found him sitting at a table, his face lighting up the moment he saw her. The evening unfolded like a dream. The conversation flowed effortlessly, punctuated by laughter and shared stories. With each word exchanged, Anne felt herself growing closer to Matthew, her affection for him deepening. The connection between them was undeniable, and she could feel her heart opening up in ways she hadn't experienced in a long time. As the evening drew to a close, Matthew reached across the table and gently took Anne's hand in his. His touch was warm and reassuring, and when he spoke, his voice was filled with a heartfelt sincerity that made Anne's heart skip a beat. "Anne," he began, his eyes locking onto hers, "I've long dreamed of having a friend like you, someone who understands me, supports me, and makes me feel like I'm not alone in this world. But I believe that we can be more than just friends. Will you allow me to get to know you better, to be with you?" Tears welled up in Anne's eyes as she looked at him, her emotions swirling inside her. She had been through so much, but in this moment, with Matthew's hand in hers, everything felt right. "Yes, Matthew," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "I would love that more than anything." The evening ended with a gentle, tender kiss, a kiss that carried with it all the unspoken promises of what was to come. As they parted, both Anne and Matthew knew that their lives had changed forever. They had found something rare and beautiful in each other, a connection that would only grow stronger with time. Anne had become the go-to person in the office, her colleagues frequently turning to her for guidance on the most challenging projects. She handled everything with such brilliance that even the toughest problems seemed to melt away under her care. Her dedication and expertise had earned her the respect and admiration of everyone, including her boss, Wes. But today, something was different. When Wes arrived at the office, there was an unmistakable heaviness in his demeanor. Concerned, Anne decided to check on him, sensing that something was weighing heavily on his mind. Knocking gently on his office door, she entered with a warm smile, carrying a steaming cup of coffee. "May I come in?" "I made us some coffee," she said softly. We looked up, trying to muster a smile but failing to hide the worry in his eyes. "Hello, Anne. Please come in. You're always welcome." Anne took a seat across from him, studying his face with a keen eye. "Did something happen?" "You seem upset," she asked gently, her voice filled with concern. Wes sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Yes, Anne, something did happen," he began, his tone heavy with the weight of his thoughts. "Do you remember when Christopher gave me that money? Well, he's run into some serious problems with his business, and things have taken a turn for the worse. To top it off, Ellen has given birth to a son. And now Christopher is demanding the money back much sooner than we expected. But that's not all." We hesitated for a moment, as if unsure how to continue. "He asked me to tell you that the apartment you live in, well, he has his own family now, and he won't be paying the loan for it anymore." Anne's heart sank, though she had somehow expected this news. She took a deep breath, trying to process what she had just heard. "I suppose I should have seen this coming," she said, her voice tinged with resignation. "It was a shock to me when I found out the property was bought on credit, but Christopher promised to take care of it. I trusted him, and once again, he's let me down. I'll find a way to pay off the loan myself. I've learned a hard lesson, but it's one I won't forget. I was naive and young, and I never thought it would end like this. But he has a son now, and I know Christopher always wanted children. He needs to think about his future." Wes shook his head, anger flickering in his eyes. "I can't believe you still feel pity for him after everything he's done," he said, frustration lacing his voice. "You sold your apartment and invested every penny in the house where he now lives with another woman. He didn't even dare to face you in person. He's a coward, Anne, and you deserve so much better." Anne managed a sad smile, the pain of her past still fresh, but she refused to let it consume her. "Our apartment is in my name," she said with quiet determination. "I earn good money and I have a wonderful boss. I'll pay off the loan myself. This is my responsibility now, and I'm not running away from it." Wes's expression softened as he listened to her. "Anne, you're not alone in this," he said, his voice full of warmth. "Gwen and I are here for you. Our company's reputation has grown because of your hard work and dedication, and I want to acknowledge that. That's why I've decided to give you a well-deserved raise." Anne's eyes widened in surprise and gratitude. "Thank you, Wes. That means a lot to me," she said, her voice filled with emotion. "Can I leave early today? I've finished everything at work, and I want to stop by the store on my way home. Today is my birthday, and Matthew and I have already picked out a gift. I just need to go pick it up." Wes's smile returned, a genuine one this time. "You and Matthew picked out a gift together?" he asked, teasingly. "Is it serious?" Anne blushed slightly, a soft smile playing on her lips. "I don't know, Wes. I think I should trust fate if it's giving me a second chance. Matthew is a good man, and Eva is such a sweet girl. They've brought so much joy back into my life." Wes leaned forward, his eyes twinkling with encouragement. "Your eyes are glowing, Anne. Don't let this chance for happiness slip away." Anne nodded, feeling a surge of hope and contentment. "You're right, Wes. I'll trust fate. And thank you truly. I'm so grateful that you and Gwen are here for me. Without your support, I might have gone crazy from loneliness." As she left Wes's office, Anne felt a renewed sense of strength and determination. Life had thrown many challenges her way, but she was ready to face them head-on. With the support of her friends and the possibility of a new beginning with Matthew, Anne knew she could overcome anything. A year had flown by in what felt like the blink of an eye. The house that had once been a mere vision on paper now stood proudly, a testament to meticulous planning and dedicated effort. As Wes stood on the terrace, admiring the panoramic view of the river, he couldn't help but be impressed. "Well, folks, this is truly impressive. The house is nothing short of spectacular. You've addressed every detail, especially with the river's potential flooding. It's like a fortress now. When do you plan to make it your home?" Anne, her eyes shimmering with joy, gently cradled her round belly and cast a loving glance at Matthew. "We're thinking it will be when the time feels right," she said with a tender smile. Matthew, equally beaming, wrapped his arms around her and placed a gentle kiss on her cheek. "We're almost there," Anne continued. "The workers are putting the final touches inside. For now, Matthew and I have decided to stay in the city until the baby arrives. Once our little one is here, we'll start thinking about moving in." Wes clapped his hands together in genuine enthusiasm. "You two have done a fantastic job. I'm genuinely thrilled for your growing family." Anne looked at Wes with a heartfelt expression. "Oh, Wes, I never imagined someone could experience such profound happiness. You've been an incredible support. Matthew, don't hesitate to reach out if you need anything. I'll always be here to help Anne's family. That's the rule." Matthew nodded appreciatively. "Thank you, Wes. Your support means the world to us. I'm diving into woodworking soon, and it feels like I'm truly at home with this craft. I'm planning to set up a local workshop." Wes chuckled, a playful glint in his eye. "That sounds fantastic, but don't even think about leaving Anne behind. She's too precious to us." Matthew laughed. "I wouldn't dream of it. Gwen and you have done so much for us. I'll always cherish your kindness and our friendship. Money isn't our primary concern right now." "Enough about work," Wes said, with a broad grin. "Let's head over to see Gwen and the kids. I'm sure they've missed us." As they arrived back home, the scene was heartwarming. The children were engrossed in a game of ball, their laughter filling the air. Gwen was busy setting the table, her efforts evident in the delicious spread she had prepared. Anne's life, once marked by abandonment and betrayal, had transformed into a narrative of renewal and joy. Thanks to Wes's intervention, her housing situation had been resolved through a diligent lawyer. With fair compensation for her work, she had managed to pay off the mortgage on her property. Her marriage to Matthew, 6 months after their meeting, had been a joyful milestone, and Evie had embraced Anne as the mother she had always longed for. Their bond was warm and genuine, the kind that many young girls might envy. Matthew's love for Anne was profound, and he deeply valued her role in raising Evie. The anticipation of their new baby brought even more happiness to their lives. Together they shopped for baby items and prepared for the future, unable to imagine their lives without each other. One day, while Matthew was away on a trip, Anne went for a routine appointment at the women's clinic. Gwen had kindly agreed to look after Evie, especially since her son Tommy was eager to play with his new friend. Anne left the clinic in high spirits, reassured that her baby was developing well. The heartbeat was strong, and despite her age, there were no complications. With a smile, she decided to stop by the mall to pick up some toys for Evie and Tommy. However, her day took an unexpected turn when she encountered her ex-husband, Christopher, at the shopping center. His eyes widened in shock as he took in the sight of Anne's pregnancy. "Anne," how Christopher stammered, his face a mixture of surprise and confusion. Anne met his gaze with a cold detachment. "Yes, my wife moved on quickly. I'm glad to see you, but not really. I heard about your son. Congratulations. It's good to see you, but not really. I have things to do. Goodbye," she said curtly, turning away and walking off. Christopher stood rooted to the spot, watching her retreating figure, struggling to process the encounter. Returning home, Christopher was met with the excited face of his young son, who rushed to greet him. Ellen was seated on the couch, absorbed in her phone screen, her attention completely absorbed by the device. Christopher's mood was a mix of anger and determination as he waited in the dimly lit corner of the restaurant. His baseball cap was pulled low, and his sunglasses shielded his eyes, masking his identity. The recording device was hidden discreetly on the table, ready to capture any incriminating evidence of Ellen's deceit. When Ellen finally arrived, she was dressed elegantly, clearly intending to enjoy her evening. Her face brightened as she spotted Christopher, but her smile faltered when she saw his stern expression. "Sorry I'm late," Ellen said, taking a seat opposite Christopher. "Traffic was a nightmare." Christopher's eyes, barely visible behind his sunglasses, scrutinized her closely. "It's all right," he said coldly. "Let's just get to the point." Ellen, sensing the tension, tried to lighten the mood. "What's with the serious look? You didn't seem this upset when we talked this morning." Christopher remained silent, his mind racing. He had seen Ellen's betrayal firsthand, and now he was determined to confront her. The clinking of cutlery and the murmur of other diners created a backdrop of normalcy that felt almost surreal to Christopher. As the evening progressed, Ellen tried to engage Christopher in conversation, but he remained distant, his mind fixated on the task at hand. He watched as Ellen spoke animatedly about her day, all the while preparing himself for the confrontation he had planned. Finally, as dessert arrived, Christopher decided it was time to reveal his hand. He took out the recording device, and with a steely gaze he said, "Ellen, I need you to explain something to me." Ellen's eyes widened as she saw the device. "What's that for?" Christopher didn't answer directly. Instead, he played the recording of Ellen leaving the apartment building and her interactions with the young man. The room seemed to shrink as the audio played, and Ellen's face turned pale. "You were with him today. You lied to me about your whereabouts," Christopher said, his voice low and steady. "How long have you been seeing him?" Ellen's hands trembled as she tried to come up with a plausible excuse. "Christopher, Don't," he cut her off. "Don't try to justify this. I've seen everything I need to see." Tears welled up in Ellen's eyes as she realized the gravity of her situation. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean for things to get this far." Christopher's face was expressionless as he continued, "You've betrayed me and our family. You've been dishonest, and I can't continue like this. We need to talk about what comes next." Ellen reached out to him, her voice choked with emotion. "Please, Christopher. Let's try to work this out." But Christopher was resolute. "No, Ellen. This isn't something we can fix. It's over." As Ellen struggled to hold back her sobs, Christopher left the restaurant, feeling a mix of relief and sadness. The evening had not gone as he had hoped, but he knew that it was necessary to confront the truth and move forward. Back at home, Ellen was left to grapple with the consequences of her actions. The betrayal had not only shattered her relationship with Christopher, but had also revealed deep cracks in her character. As she faced the reality of her choices, she was left to ponder the future and the relationships she had jeopardized along the way. Ellen walked into the restaurant with a cheerful demeanor, her eyes scanning the room until they landed on Christopher. Her face lit up with a broad smile as she approached him. "Hi, Christopher. I'm sorry I'm late." "I was stuck in traffic," Ellen said, her tone light and casual. Christopher forced a smile in return, though his eyes betrayed a flicker of concern. "No problem. I just wanted to ask what happened to the money I sent you." Ellen waved her hand dismissively. "Everything is fine. I bought clothes and will be able to make ends meet. I was late because I was trying on new clothes. What about you? What's new at work?" "Nothing special. Just the usual routine," Christopher replied, his voice betraying a hint of detachment. "I'm glad you were able to buy everything you needed." The evening progressed, and despite Ellen's attempts to make the conversation pleasant, Christopher's mind was preoccupied with his thoughts. As they dined, he covertly recorded their conversation, his eyes never leaving Ellen as he collected evidence of her deceit. After the meal, Christopher was ready to confront Ellen. As they exited the restaurant, he led her to a quiet corner, pulling out the recording device. "Is this why you've been so demanding lately? Have you been seeing someone else?" he asked, his voice steady but filled with hurt as he held up the device. Ellen's face went pale as she listened to the recording of her secret rendezvous. Shock and guilt washed over her as she met Christopher's piercing gaze. "I didn't think you'd find out like this," she stammered. Christopher's anger flared. "You betrayed me, Ellen. Now I understand why you were so eager to get money from me. You've been living a double life." Ellen tried to form an explanation, but her words fell flat. The truth was out, and Christopher's trust had been irreparably broken. His resolve hardened as he listened to her feeble attempts at justification. "I don't want to see you anymore, Ellen. We're done," Christopher said firmly, his voice unwavering. Without another word, Christopher turned and walked away from Ellen, leaving her standing alone in the dimly lit parking lot. The finality of his words hung in the air, and Ellen was left to grapple with the consequences of her actions. As Christopher drove away, he felt a mix of relief and sadness. The confrontation had been difficult, but he needed to move forward and rebuild his life. The experience had taught him a crucial lesson about trust and honesty, and he was ready to embrace a fresh start with a renewed sense of purpose. As we wrap up this powerful story, we've witnessed the complexities of trust, betrayal, and the courage to move forward. From Anne's journey of personal renewal and the support she received from her friends to Christopher's painful but necessary decision to confront betrayal, each chapter reveals profound lessons about the importance of honesty, the impact of our choices, and the value of true relationships. We'd love to hear from you. What is one thing you've learned from this story that you will bring into your own life? Share your thoughts and reflections in the comments below. If you found this video insightful, please leave your comment below. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Your support helps us continue creating content that matters. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next video.